Hello, welcome. My name is Scott here with Stanley GreyHart Barker, known for his extensive career casting League of Legends amongst other things. Stan, how you doing?
Doing very well. Glad to be joining you on this here audiocast, podcast, videocast, whatever it is you're calling it. Absolutely looking forward to this. It's always good to spend time with you in general and, fun new dynamic today.
So, well, in terms of the various other things you've done, being an interviewer, a play-by-play for TFT, Rocket League, Overwatch, and others, a rap god, a stage host, but it's the one at the end there I'm most interested in talking to you about today. Uh, in terms of the stage hosting part of your career, uh, I'm kind of going into the assumption that people wouldn't, not know anything at all. For the people watching, would you mind defining kind of what stage hosting is?
Yeah, sure. I think it fulfills a whole bunch of different things that you need to be doing at an event. Obviously, it also depends on what sort of thing the event is. I'll use the experience I've got coming up in this next week or so, depending on when you're listening to when this was released. It's just about to start as we're recording here. But we've got Insomnia, the big gaming festival coming up at the NEC in Birmingham. I'll be on the esports stage there. I'm going to be sort of working the crowd and sort of getting them hyped up for various finals, throwing to commentators, doing interviews with players, handing out some prizes, maybe some giveaways to the crowd. Just generally sort of keeping things rolling, being the MC of the event. And yeah, for me, that's a lot of fun.
So you mentioned that with the terms of interacting with commentators and things. Are there any from your conversation with people when you're talking about what you were doing here? Is there anything that's that specifically you want people to know that stage hosting isn't?
um, I think there's sometimes an expectation on a stage host that again, it is dependent event to event, but there's an expectation that they're going to know absolutely everything about the product that is being served at that exact moment. And while I think it's important to have a good general understanding of it, I'm going to go into things like, for instance, at the last Insomnia, we had a massive Valorant tournament. And while I know a bit about Valorant, I've played a little bit of Valorant. I haven't cast any Valorant, but I know quite a few people who do. I wouldn't ever claim to be an expert on Valorant. And yet I was
Hmm.
stage hosting for an event where we had the UK's biggest prize pool for a Valorant event. And at that, while I didn't want to come across as an idiot and someone who didn't know anything about the game, equally, I'm not going to be able to turn around and be able to match wits with some of the experts who I had on the analyst desk or the shoutcasters who would be calling the games. And so I think it's important to know there's not, in my opinion, going to be an expectation of you must know everything about every single one, especially at an event where I'm going to have, maybe 6 different games across a weekend. I'm not going to be at the top tier of understanding for each one, but hopefully you're able to deliver a relative amount of understanding and keywords, buzzwords that you need to hit to show that you're not completely clueless.
Yeah, and I think that would be definitely something that kind of initially when I came across this idea surprised me that that while I think a lot of hosts and I'm sure yourself included do a very good job of seeming like they're deeply involved in the ecosystem of each game they're covering, that you can hosting is something it's quite possible to go through and do for a variety of different things. Uh, just kind of as a brief history of yourself, just in terms of the hosting part, uh, you know, how many times have you been doing hosting yourself in an approximate total, if it's too many to remember?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I'd say I've done 4 big events and a couple of smaller ones at this point. And one of those events had a League of Legends final that was involved, the game that I've spent the most years shoutcasting on myself. Obviously, wasn't casting on it there, had the ability to throw that to the casters. That one for me was a lot smoother because that's my specialist subject. And frankly, I did know what I was talking about when I was introducing it. But at the same event, we also had other finals, things like Rocket League, and there, I go car hits ball into goal, but tried to sound maybe a little bit more eloquent than that. In terms of number of events, yeah, I mean, I'm coming up to, I think, yeah, a decent half a dozen or so events that I've been had the opportunity to do, which is a real pleasure. Like I say, another one coming up, which I'll be leaving for tomorrow for rehearsals.
So, we mentioned the idea you've been doing the kind of like the more traditional commentating stuff, doing play by play, and in that kind of space. How did you actually end up moving into doing hosting then, as opposed to just being in the commentator space?
Frankly, the opportunity presented itself, and I found myself fortunate enough to be asked. It was again but I'll keep mentioning them because it's coming up. I'm wearing their merch today, so why not give a big old shout out to Insomnia Gaming Festival. They're one of their sort of talent managers, their production managers, got in touch with me, said we really like the work you've been doing for our shoutcasting. There's a gap this year for stage hosting. Would you be interested? And I was like, well, that's not something I've ever done. Are you sure you sure you want someone who's a complete rookie coming in to do this? And they were like, we think you've got a good set of skills for it, that you'll bring the right energy to it. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, I'll have a go. And frankly, threw myself into it, and that was my first ever time stage hosting, and it was at such a massive event at Insomnia, and I've been lucky enough to get invited back a number of times now.
So, I mean, because you've got that bridge kind of, because I know that for some hosts, they won't necessarily have been casters. What would, in that transition between hosting and casting, again, similar question before, what's been similar, what's been different?
I think that one of the things that I've never had a problem with as a caster, which fortunately is a skill that translates really nicely in stage hosting, is making stuff up as I go along. As I can say for you as well, I think that a lot of shoutcasters are very much sort of blessed with the gift of the gab. We can talk, we can fill holes. I look back to another Insomnia many years ago when I was casting with Chronicler, who's over in the LCK for League of Legends now, and we had I think it must have been around about 2 hours worth of pauses that we had to fill through. Ooh. And honestly, I was getting to a point where I might as well have changed my name to Phil, because that was how much of it we'd done. And it was ridiculous stuff. Of course, you've got so much you can talk about League of Legends and about the game that's happening, but they got points where we were talking about our favorite chocolate bars, the event, doing little random dancing. It was genuinely painful, but it was at that moment that I realized that with the right person by my side or in my ear, I could pretty much talk for Britain, and in Mal's case for the Netherlands. And it was sort of knowing that I had that ability to fill, and if things went wrong or needed to hold things up for a little while, that I could ramble, and hopefully ramble with enough of a point to it that it didn't come across as too much rambling. As hopefully this isn't either. And I think that's one of the big ones that I've been able to shift across quite a lot, because at the end of the day, when there are pauses, when there's things not quite going as smoothly as you might expect them to on stage, whereas, well, admittedly that isn't the case for a lot of the events I've worked, things have run very smoothly, but it can happen. You get a delay, you get something not quite as you expect. Just that ability to think on the fly, to go and keep things moving. That for me is a very important interchangeable skill. One that maybe is something I've had to move across from is, you reference Rap God. It's a term I like to use, both because of my love for Eminem and using it as my vocal warm-ups, but also it's the style I try to push for myself really hard, and the ability to do it when I'm casting League from my play-by-play. And the reality is that, generally speaking, you're never going to want to do that in a stage host role, and actually you have to be a lot more sort of clearly spoken, steadier, more precise with what you're saying. I'm not going to go on stage and go, and here we are, we're going to do this, and there's just absolutely no point to that. So actually slowing myself down and not really able to bring that part of my play-by-play into a stage host role, but still have the energy, still have that ability to project, to hopefully bring a level of enthusiasm to the crowd, both at home and watching online. That's, again, another useful interchangeable skill.
Sorry, one dog I could have potentially moved past. 2 dogs sitting on your lap and yawning. For anyone who's not familiar, would you mind introducing these 2 beautiful creatures who are currently pseudo-napping on you?
We are seeing 2 of the 3 greyhounds. This is Loki here, and her big brother 4. Hope is in the other room, may make an appearance, but is a little bit more camera shy. And yeah, they're good as gold. These 2 got me through those rough COVID years when no one else around the house. They say, "Are you crazy if you talk to your dogs?" Well, no comment.
So to go back to what you're saying, in terms of like the filling gaps, just I kind of wanted to get into practice stuff later on, but this is, I think, too direct of a thing to not bring up here, because I think that's going to be one of the things if someone's coming into doing stage hosting. And I know from, personally, I've had the one experience where I kind of unexpectedly ended up doing stage hosting, and it was one of my fears, and it was turned out to be a completely justified fear, which is that, you get up on stage, in my case, the end of the show wasn't necessarily particularly, specifically laid out, so I get up on stage with no idea what is expected of me, in that in that time, but knowing that I'm going to be the center of attention while stuff gets figured out. So I was going to bring forward some scenarios for later on, but let's do it right now. So in
Okay.
the case that, I mean, ideally, I suppose you wouldn't want to get into the situation, but in the case that you are, you're called up on stage unexpectedly, you've got no production in your ear. You're talking about the idea of having production in your ear before. You've got no production in your ear for whatever reason. You're called up on stage. You need to fill time, and in my case, it was preparing for a prize winner ceremony where everything's gotten really confusing, and you don't even know like the team names anymore, particularly. How would you, as a more experienced stage host by far than me, approach that kind of situation? What would you be thinking, and how would you kind of work through a less than ideal setup?
I think experience or not, that's a difficult situation. I remember you chatting with me on the back of the event you were talking about there, and I really felt for you, because the reality is that one of my main things that I'll always encourage, and we'll talk about it a bit more later, is this sort of element of preparation, having cue cards with everything set up. And when you're just suddenly being essentially thrust onto a stage, sort of, thrown into the spotlight of, oh, what are you doing? And you've got no voice in your ear, and you weren't really expecting it. You can't really essentially prepare for that. At that point, it's just a case of ad lib. And for me, I've always thought I'm a little bit of an improv comedian in an esports host body, and I like going on, and I can sort of I like riffing off things. So this X has happened. I can talk about that for 5 minutes. If it's just you talking, that's where it becomes difficult. If this wasn't a conversation, I would struggle to be putting this out as a podcast of just me talking about what to do, because it becomes, for me, quite dull and monotonous, just me talking. I suppose in that scenario, depending on how much of a crowd there is, how much they seem to be up for crowd interaction, if I'm just filling for time, so if I literally got, so tomorrow night we'll have our first sort of stage runs at Insomnia. If I literally, with no expectation of it about to happen, just suddenly got told quickly go on stage, fill for 5-10 minutes. If we've got a crowd, which is usually the reason why you're going to have to fill, because you've got something out there, I'm going to try and bounce off them a little bit, even if it's just a give me a cheer if you're glad that Timo was played in that last game, or what champions do you want to see? A little bit of crowd interaction. Give me something to bounce off, because if I'm going up onto that stage on my own and I'm just talking, I'm not sure that goes smoothly for X number of minutes if I'm not prepared and haven't got a little bit of scripting behind myself. Because while I'm not going to script every word I say, I want to have a rough idea of what I'm going into. So I think, yeah, for me in that scenario, I'll try and riff off the crowd as much as I can. If I've got other people I can drag in, like if there's another caster or something on the stage with me, who I can pass a mic between, do a little brief interview, anything to keep it rolling. Worst case scenario, if for instance it's actually you're hosting, but it's only going out to an online audience, so you've literally got no crowd in front of you, you're just filling for time, which is something I've had to do in the past on online broadcasts for league casting, and when I've been hosting desks and analyst segments. Just try and find things that you can drag to memory of. This thing has just happened, that thing has just happened. Try not to go down the rabbit hole of let's talk about what cereals and chocolate bars we like, because then it starts to look desperate, if you can help it. But at the end of the day, it's what comes to mind. And for you, in your scenario, you've just, I think it was a TFT event that you were doing. TFT better than 99.9% of people out there. You've got things you can talk about that set. You will have seen some of the matches. You'll be able to say, we saw this was an incredible moment, and just drag up any little bit that you can talk about, any analogy you can bring up, and just run with it for as long as you can, until you finally get that relief of, okay, you can come off now, count. We're sorted, and it will be an absolute relief when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, so in the case of the one which I did, it was with a group of people who were still pretty new at the whole esports thing. So because it didn't occur to me at the time to, and I suspect that maybe this is kind of like calling back to Stan from like the first time doing hosting, of not knowing what it is that I needed to know to be able to pull it off smoothly. So in retrospect, I think it could have been fine had I sort of realized, oh, this is what it will be like if I go onto stage without these particular pieces of information, and done a much better job of being like, okay, I'm going to make sure I have notes of all the team names, everyone important I need to be able to shout out and things. But I really like your idea of trying to draw other people into it, because that's something which I think didn't really occur to me at the time. Of being like, okay, I've got other people I can use, because in the context that I was strolling up on stage, there were absolutely people I could have called up and been like, okay, we're gonna use these other people to fill time, just because I know they've got stuff to say, and it doesn't need to be about me just waffling and filling time.
Yeah, it's tricky because I mean, even in that scenario, like let's say I was one of the casters there, and suddenly you're there going, "Can GreyHart come on stage?" And if suddenly I'm like, "Nah, mate, that ain't happening," then that in itself becomes an awkward scenario. But
Yes.
hopefully not something that someone's going to throw you under the bus with. I mean, for what it's worth, it sounds like you handled it exceptionally well, given everything. For me, I'm quite lucky, even in those early sort of founding days of doing a bit of stage hosting. I've had really, and I'm not saying that your production team were off the ball in any way, shape, or form, but for me, I've been very lucky that the production teams and the broadcast teams I've worked with have been so on it. We get rehearsals, I get bullet notes and set times of hit these marks, throw to camera, throw to casters, whatever you need to do at these times. And so for me, the most important thing I ever have when I go on stage, apart from the fancy suits, which are apparently what got me hired in the first place. Someone, my old boss on that, he used to say, "I hire your suits, you just come along with them." My number one thing that I'll always take on with me will be my cue cards. And here I've literally just found these lying around as I was getting ready for Insomnia coming up. But these are some from last time, and they might have just small bullet points or team names, player names, phonetics, whatever it is. But I never will walk onto stage without them. And if I do, I'll look a lot more sunk than I normally do, because they're my lifelines. I'm hitting this point now. This is what I'm throwing to next. This is the person who I'm going to bring out and ask these questions to. And again, it's not scripted, but I have my bullet points. I know where I'm coming from. And straight away at that point, the whole situation just is so much less tense, so much less stressful.
Well, okay, I had a plan for where we were going to go structure-wise in this, but there's so much interesting stuff coming up, I don't want to just leave it. Because again, I want to keep this very practically focused. So you talked about the idea of having your kind of sort of mini run of show, or kind of order. So I know I remember seeing my first run of show and being terrified by it because it looked very complicated.
Yeah.
But so if we're Stan, if we are inhabiting the persona of Stan, and we're at Insomnia, we're going to be going on stage for a segment. Can you walk me through what are the conversations that you have had before that point that lets you know what you're going to be doing when you get up on the stage?
So I mean, I'm gonna, just because it's really fresh on my mind at the minute with preparing to come into it this coming week. First of all, it's knowing your key points of contact. So while I've currently got dogs on my lap, for the next 5 days I'll have a cat in my ear, because she's, I've worked with other fantastic broadcast managers as well, but she's the voice who's always in my ear at Insomnia. She'll be telling me everything I need to know. And honestly, I probably irritate the hell out of her. And apologies to you if you ever watch this, cat, because it must be annoying to have to deal with me. But I am so OCD. I want to be so prepared that before every single segment, I'll be like, right, what's my run through? And I will be going through. She's got beautifully detailed, color-coded runs of show. And it makes my life so much easier, because I go in and I go, okay, there's Stan's walk on, there's Stan's introduction, we're at Insomnia, this is what event we're doing, here's the interview segment you've got, here's your teams that are coming out, and then it's just for me to fill in those gaps. So I then go backstage, I go, right, here's team one. Phonetics is one of my biggest thing. Just a quick anecdote, if you will. But my not most, I've had a couple of embarrassing moments in my esports history. One of the ones that always comes back to me and genuinely makes me quite upset to this day, while I can still laugh at it, was I used to do the unofficial LPL broadcast, which I absolutely love doing. And I was casting one of my first games on there. I had decent knowledge of the LPL, but there was this new rookie that had come through, and we were casting his game up in the top lane. And every time it came up to him, I would tell you how amazing this new player Theshy was, because it was block capitals THESHY. This was me casting a very young The Shy,
Yes.
and called him Pesci for the entire broadcast. And I still look back on that and cringe and pray to God the VOD doesn't exist anywhere. But ever since then, I've been so hot on phonetics, because actually I care about my name. I care that there's a capital G and a capital H in GreyHart. And for players coming on stage, some of them who maybe haven't had stage experience before, maybe it will be their one and only time they play at a LAN in front of a few hundred or even more people. I want to give them the kudos. If I'm going to give them an entry, I'm giving them the best entry they can, and that means saying their name right. So every single player who walks onto that stage, I will have spoken to them beforehand, and on my notes, I won't have spelt their name right, but I'll have written it out phonetically, and I will do the best I can. So if I've got Creamy Dreamy coming up, but he has 4 Y's in his name, I'll be like, do you want me to call you Creamy Dreamy or Creamy Dreamy? And everyone who gets it, they will all get that same treatment, do the best. Sometimes there's a bit of a language barrier, but always will do my best to get those phonetics right. And that means that when I do my ring walks, which is one of my favorite things, I could imagine being like an announcer at a boxing match and being like, and introducing the world champion. I just love doing it. Like, it just comes naturally to me. I have fun with it. I'm maybe a bit over the top. I'm maybe a little bit, bit sort of a bit ham with it all. But for me, it's fun, and players seem to like it. Gives them that introduction. So yeah, I'll do the phonetics on that. So yeah, basically for me, once I've had that first chat with, in this case, Kat, my production manager, and I've seen what my run of show is, I've made my brief bullet points of, okay, you've got this thing here, this thing here, this thing here. I know the points I'm going to hit, the marks I've got to go at. I know what my casters' names are, who I'm going to throw to. I've had my base understanding of the game that I'm coming into. I've gone, right, okay, this is the CSGO finals. I better not call them champions here because that's the wrong game. And so knowing about the maps, knowing about vetoes, whatever else it is, just give myself a little bit of a leg to stand on.
So with that, with the regards to the last thing you mentioned with the game-specific stuff, I'm assuming that's things you prepare for yourself ahead of the show rather than like asking for the casters to fill you in on.
Both, to be honest. I will always aim to know what my finals are that I've got coming up. So, for instance, this weekend we've got a massive range of things from EAFC, CS:GO, Valorant, League of Legends, all hitting the stage, and I think there's a couple of other bits as well. So I will make sure that I've watched at least a broadcast of each of those, not necessarily in the week or so leading up to, but at some point I'll have that information, have base notes on it, and I'll be like, okay, this is what we have to talk about. Map picks are really important here, whether or not a team's attacking or defending, etc. But yeah, you know what? If you've got other things to use, fantastic casters with incredible knowledge on a game, use them. I'll go up to, just as an example, George Overton will be casting EAFC on the Friday of Insomnia. I've cast FIFA and the likes a decent chunk myself, but my knowledge of the current game isn't as high as it would have been previously. I'll go up to him and go, right, we're getting a 1v1 kickoff match. What does that mean? Does that, do they get to pick their own players? Will it be like an ultimate team, or are the teams that are stronger? What should we be expecting? And straight away, just by what he's telling me about the meta or about that particular game, it'll be like, oh yeah, and this means he'll want to find a 5-3-2 formation or something here, and I'll be like, cool. And suddenly, as long as I'm usually okay with them, be like, am I right using that? Like, I don't want to steal your words, but they're like, yeah, that's fine. And suddenly I've said something that makes me sound clever when in reality, I'm not any good at that game.
That's really interesting. I don't think that's one of the things I really wanted to get into with this is sort of exposing the parts where you wouldn't see on broadcast. So, you see someone come out on the stage and have these conversations and say these kind of things, but you never see the talking they're having with casters, with players and things outside that. Because I know I've certainly assumed that just the person just had internally all of this stuff, rather than it being, oh, this person has lent on a lot of other people to be able to perform in the way which they're doing. So that's really cool. I think that's a really good thing to encourage, especially since I think if you don't feel confident as a host or as a caster, I can imagine it's a lot harder to kind of go up and sort of expose weakness to other people or seemingly expose weakness by asking for, I guess maybe not directly for help, but that you're having a discussion with them, which may indicate that you know less than you would like to.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with standing on the shoulders of giants, as the old adage would say. I always will remember, and again, another shout out to someone who really helped me. I believe it was either I think it was 2 Insomnias ago. We were having one of our biggest Valorant tournaments. Valorant for me was very new. I really hadn't had a massive amount of chance to study up on it, and a caster called Summer just basically walked me through it, and before every day gave me little prep docs and ideas of what to talk about and how to handle the interview segments. And honestly, without that, I wouldn't have looked anywhere near the level of, I picked things up as I went along, and I'd like to think each segment I got better and better. But at the start of it, yeah, I would have looked like a fish out of water.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose again, like it feels like that's another really important thing in general. Is as much as it seems like an obvious thing to say, I think going out of your way to build good relationships with the people you are working with the casters, the producers, and other people involved in the project. Again, it doesn't seem super obvious from an outside perspective, but certainly from my experience, it's been, as you said there, the difference between doing well and not doing well. I kind of want to touch back on something you just said though, with the,
Sure.
we went through the Valorant with someone helping you out there. If you are working with a game which you're less confident on, how do you approach that differently from a game which you feel more comfortable?
I think it depends how much you need to say about it, because at the end of the day, stage hosting does cover a wide range of things. So there'll be some games where I'll come on and literally my only job will be like, hello, welcome to the show. These are our EAFC grand finals. Here are the teams. This is what they're playing for. Here are our shoutcasters. And if I'm on and off at the drop of a hat like that, and I don't have to worry too much about interviews or analyst segments, I could kind of have a very sort of base understanding and be absolutely fine. Whereas with this Valorant one I was telling about, I found out literally when I arrived, I think it was, we're going to have analysts. You're going to be the analyst desk as well as the stage host. And obviously I know it's a different role to the stage hosting we're talking about, but it's something I didn't have to, but I did cover in that scenario and was very happy to. And it was like, okay, well, cool, I'm doing this thing now. So yeah, I need to be able to say, we're getting to the veto segment, or they're going to be picking Jet or whichever champion. See, I said champion there. I'd get in trouble if someone heard me say that. I'm not allowed to say champion. It's agents for Valorant. So yeah, just little things like that, and just the right words. And then again, you're probably going to have to do a little interview section with the winners at the end. Something I know that we might talk about a little bit later, how you handle those interview segments. And if I come on and go, hey, you played well, you shot some people today, doesn't sound great. But if I can come on and say, well, on map 2, on insert map name here, you had this pick and this was brilliant for you. You found, you took 4 kills at this particular situation. Watching the games that are happening, absorbing it all, listening to the casters who are delivering this amazing broadcast, steal their stuff, but in the nicest way possible. Credit it where it's needed. But you can sound like you know what you're talking about. And by the end of it, you usually do.
Yes, well, no, I definitely want to come on to the desk hosting and interviewing stuff as well. I'm aware that we were kind of planning for this whole thing to take half an hour, and it's been about half an hour long.
I was like, there's no way we'll do half an hour, and then I remembered how much I ramble.
No, the thing is, like, I'm trying desperately to kind of keep us on try and make sure this is as useful as possible while there's still so much good stuff to talk about. It gives me great sympathy now for when I see other podcasts. I'm like, geez, they didn't get to a lot of stuff in their podcast. I'm like, I'm trying my best. All right.
Hey, maybe there has to be a part 2 at some point. Maybe we're just setting up our own like Peter cinematic universe here.
Maybe. Well, let's see. I was going to ask you about Insomnia. I think we've kind of covered some of it before, but
Sure.
In terms of going back to the specific event that's coming up as we're filming, from the first Insomnia you did to now, sorry, is this the 4th one you've got coming up, or?
I'm genuinely trying to remember. I know it sounds bad, but things sometimes blur into one a little bit. So this is I-72,
I believe.
I definitely hosted 70 and 71. I-69, I think that was the one Janiro hosted. So I think this is my 3rd stage hosting. Okay. It's either my 3rd or my 4th.
So in terms of specifically from the Insomnias that you've done, then, what are kind of the lessons you've learned from the first time you've done it to now going to this one? And if you were to kind of go back and give yourself advice the first time out doing it, what would you be saying to yourself now?
I'd reinforce that point I made earlier. Preparation is key. I'm not going to be as cliche as saying, those who fail to prepare to fail, or something like that. But it's so true that the more I've done when I walk onto that stage, the more notes I've made, the more comfortable I feel. And even if I don't use half those notes, a bit like yourself for this podcast, at least I had it there and I've got it in the back pocket for later on. Loki, what are you doing? So that'd be my number one thing. And my number 2 thing, and it's, if I were to go back to, let's say, I-70, if that was my first one, and make comments there, it would be yourself. And it's the biggest mistake that I made in my first year, was I'd seen all these fantastic. I've had the pleasure of working in Insomnia for, I think I'm coming up to about my 13th or 14th Insomnia in total, and I've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of fantastic stage hosts, and I'll apologize if I miss any off, but in recent memory, I can think of Stuart, I can think of Janiro, and I can think of Munchables who did it, all who did a terrific job, all who had their own unique style to it. But because that's what I'd seen so recently, and I was kind of having to fill these shoes I wasn't used to filling, I tried too hard to be what I'd seen before. And I think I lost a bit of myself in that. And it wasn't until I started feeling comfortable, as if it was like, I call it my stage. It's not my stage, of course. There's loads of other people, especially the production team, who are completely responsible. But the second I walk onto that stage, in my mind, I own that stage. And since I've been able to feel more comfortable and I feel like I belong there and I deserve to be on that stage, it's GreyHart you get to see now. It's not a GreyHart amalgamated with things he's borrowed from Munchables or Ginny or something like that. And that was the hardest thing for me the first time round. And I've had the pleasure of getting to work alongside a couple of people who have very kindly covered segments for me when maybe I've had to cast League of Legends or I've not been available or my voice has been completely stripped. And they've said, oh, what would you do? How can I be like you on this? I was like, don't try and be like me. Whatever you do, don't be like me, because there is a tiny, tiny percent of the world who have the absurd, insane energy that I put out onto a stage. And that's not a negative comment to anybody else who's not me or hasn't got that energy. It's just you've got to find the style that suits you. If you're a little bit more laid back, cool, casual, that works great as well. You can go on and you can sound as laid back and as awesome as you want to. For me, I go out and I bounce around like the Easter Bunny, and yeah. I mean, you see me backstage, I'm literally hopping around like this before I go on, because I'm just waiting, sort of like a firework that's about to go off on stage. And sometimes it's a little bit over the top, but the most important thing is, go out, be yourself. If you're not like GreyHart, that's absolutely fine. That doesn't mean you can't be a good stage host. Hell, it might mean you might be able to be a better stage host.
Well,
Go and do your thing, basically.
I want to draw in specifics here because it seems really interesting. So, what were you specifically doing? You're saying you're trying to be like other stage hosts. What would you be doing? What did you do then that you wouldn't do now because you wanted to try and be more yourself?
I think a lot of it was just I didn't let sort of my full energy go out. So it's almost like the opposite of what I'm telling other people who maybe don't have the, what literally, I'm not using, not my word, but other people's, this GreyHart energy that kind of comes out. It's like I didn't allow myself to do that because I'd seen, Munch Joe, he was absolutely brilliant what he did. He was so chilled out, so calm, and so relaxed, so conversational on stage. But actually that doesn't suit me quite so well when I go on. I need to be, hyper energy, hype all the time, and okay, I'm not screaming and shouting my head off, but I need to have that sort of that bounce to me. And until I sort of let that out and allowed myself to really, just go and do my thing when I wanted to be a bit more hype, with whether it be the ring walks or hello Insomnia, welcome to the NEC, whatever else I do. And until I did that, it wasn't really me. And sort of I've had to let this inner boxing announcer out so that he can be a bit over the top sometimes, and wear crazy Hawaiian shirts and the like, and suits that frankly they're somewhat elaborate.
What was the process of going from one to the other for you? Was it a case of watching back your initial performance and thinking, I feel too closed in?
I think that it was just a realization of, I can do this thing and this works and crowd seems to react to that. And I think it was around about the second or third day of my first Insomnia hosting where I was sort of just like, oh yeah, if I can just go out and start shouting a little bit like I would when I'm play by play, but slowing it down and delivering a hype, I'm getting a real reaction back from the audience. And sometimes that's tough because if you've been to Insomnia, you'll know that the esports stage doesn't always have a crowd of 200-300 people. Sometimes we have that many chairs out and we have 20 people in the audience while the finals build up. But actually, you got to remember, you bring a broadcast out to Twitch as well. So go out, have that energy. And for me, that was the big turning point when I sort of let loose my inhibitions a little bit and just went, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be this slightly, caricature of a person out there.
Yeah, because I'm trying to lay out this path for people who try and do it themselves, because I can definitely, yeah, this is a somewhat self-serving exercise because I definitely want to try more stage hosting myself, and uh, as someone who's plagued with a lot of anxiety, my first thought is, you go out, because I think we're kind of pretty similar in a lot of respects, and that, like, I think for me a high energy approach would make sense. My big fear is going out and being like, "All right, Insomnia," and just like having people do complete silence back from the
Oh,
audience.
I have that. I have that.
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So there's all of like there's the cliche things of, oh, imagine the audience naked. Well, I imagine the audience cheering, because if they react or if they
Interesting.
don't react, while I'm doing something that they can bounce off. If they want to give a big cheer, that's awesome. Sounds great on the broadcast because you can hear it over the like the cardioid mics and stuff. Wrong term, you know what I mean. But if they don't, I'm still broadcasting out to Twitch where there might be a couple of hundred people watching and they're getting hyped and pumped for it. I still basically every final that comes out, whether it's a £10,000 prize pool or if it's £100 prize pool or it's a charity show match, I want every match to feel like the final that those players who are going on stage deserve. And maybe they'll have a big crowd, maybe they won't have a big crowd, but I want to give that experience. So for me, I've had to switch off a layer of anxiety and self-consciousness of you've gone and you've done this big thing and you have had no response, to cool, move on, next bit, still hype. There's a massive, I genuinely imagine a massive audience out there cheering, and you don't have to wait for the cheers to die down so much when they're not actually there, but they're there in my head, which is maybe a statement about my own mental health more than anything. But
That's really interesting, though. I don't think I've ever heard that idea, because I was kind of really trying to mine for like those little nuggets of, uh, because it feels like so much of this is how you mentally approach what you're doing, and the idea of just like building this layer up and kind of having that mental audience cheering. I've never ever heard anybody talk about that, but that seems very very helpful because I can definitely imagine being in an audience, and if a stage show's coming out being very very energetic, the audience just not being, or being perhaps too British
yeah, yeah,
to get cheering, but still enjoying the high energy part of it, and the difference between a host who kind of like falters when there's no like real reaction and a host who just kind of keeps going, and sort of acts like that would be a normal thing for you to do.
Mm. I think that the nice thing for me over like I always draw like a bit of a comparison in my head to stand-up comedians and what they do. The nice thing for me is if there's silence, that doesn't mean I'm bombing. It's just like you
Okay.
say, sometimes crowds aren't always going to get as hyped as I am. That's fine, especially if there's a very finite amount of people in the audience. I'm not expecting a big wall of cheers every time I say "Welcome to Insomnia." This is this final. But if I can keep my energy level up at the end of it, I'm going to go back and I know you're going to. I think you're going to ask me later on about do I watch my own broadcast back. I don't do a huge amount of it, but I do. What I do see, I like to feel, yeah, I gave that 100%, regardless of what feedback. The crowd, they do what they want to do, but if I watch it and I'm pleased with it, and I go, yeah, I hyped that up, that was big, then I'm happy with it.
I suppose, like, from a casting point of view, that does make a lot of sense, and I think I just hadn't really connected those two ideas as of yet. That, if we're doing a TFT League of Legends broadcast and things to an internet audience, it's exactly the case that we're kind of hyping into the void with no like direct feedback from people necessarily. So
I mean, all I was going to say there, I mean, like when you take it to like kind of compare it to casting, I mean, how many times? I mean, we both came through the days of Compete League and doing broadcasts there, where very easily you could have 10 viewers could be a good night sometimes. And actually, would you give less of a hype performance? Would you hold back on a team fight because you didn't think anybody was watching? I don't think you would. And then sometimes actually, and I go back to when I was doing Belong Arena Clash, and sometimes we didn't get as many numbers as maybe we would have liked to for our broadcasts. But every now and then I would get DMs. I will always treasure a DM I had from a player called Super Jesus, who was on one of the Belong Arena Clash teams, and he was like, dude, I just watched you cast my game. I went back and watched it after we'd finished. That was so hype. That was so exciting. It was like I was like in the LEC, like being cast by Medic or someone like that. That was so exciting. And for me, that meant so much because one person had gone back and watched that and it had meant something to them. And for them, that had been like their finals. And if I can give that feeling to some people or a few people in an audience, that I've done my job.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences, and it definitely does feel like, yeah, yeah, exactly. I suppose even if at the time, you don't have that person being excited about the thing that you're doing, that you've created that possibility for them.
Mm.
Uh, Gosh, okay. The Well, let's start moving the conversation forward because I realise we're now 40 minutes in. Wait. So you already mentioned that you tend not to watch the previous shows, but what kind of stuff? I know we sort of partially covered this already, but is there anything you haven't mentioned as of yet that you picked up from watching yourself back?
Yeah, I mean, my main reason for not watching back, I think it's important to watch a little bit for progression and to pick up on maybe mistakes made and things that can be learned. But considering I'm as much of a narcissist as I am with generally liking to be the center of attention, um, I weirdly hate the sound of my own voice. And
Interesting.
so when I go back and I listen to broadcasts, I quite physically cringe at some things where I hear myself talking, and if I hear myself saying stuff, it's something I have to work on, but it's just always been the case. I prefer to get my feedback from other people. I like going up to multiple people and saying, "You've heard me this event. Any feedback at all?" And I make notes. That's my main way of dealing with it. I'll go to my production manager even after I've come off stage, and I'll be like, "Oh, I didn't feel that was great. Didn't feel I hit marks on that. So what can I do better?" And sometimes I'll be like, "Stan, don't be an idiot. Stop beating yourself up. You're a bit of a perfectionist. Chill out. It's fine." And other times I'll go, "Oh, you could do this," and then cool, I progress through that. So if I've got lots of people, I don't want loads of people telling me I'm great. At the end of the day, it's not, of course, it's always nice to hear, but if you can come to me and say, "How about this? Will this work?" And sometimes you take feedback with a pinch of salt. People have told me to chill out before, and sometimes that's been a good bit of advice of, okay, don't be hype all the time, because if you're hype all the time, you're hype none of the time because it becomes too much of a plateau. So yeah, have these peaks and troughs of it, sure. But other people are like, you're far too crazy for this. It's my energy. That's what's got me as far as I am. 10 years into a sort of casting and the likes, and so I'm not going to dramatically change that at this point. But there's certainly advice that
Hmm.
can be taken, and you take some, you leave some. Hopefully, you develop yourself. I'm a completely different caster, completely different host to what I was, however many years ago, and that's because of that development we all go through.
Well, I guess there's kind of two things which I wanted to one to briefly follow up and one to go into more detail. The Firstly, there was the whole idea of getting production in particular to give you advice, because I know I've certainly in my experience it's not necessarily super common for people to give certainly unsolicited advice.
Oh, some
And
people do. Don't worry about that. There are plenty of people who like to give their 2 cents, but yeah, no, generally I go looking.
But like, I guess this isn't going to be a focus, but just briefly, if someone's coming into the same sort of position you are, especially if they're a newer person in, they're aware that their production things are much more experienced than they are. But I think the general sort of rule of thumb is people will rarely kind of give you direct feedback unless you ask for it, just because
Yeah.
it's a kind of sort of a thing of everybody assuming each other is a professionalist, even if you can see that somebody's really struggling. So how would if you're kind of casting yourself back to your early years, how would you like develop that kind of relationship with the people you're working with to get them willing to give you that kind of feedback without feeling too awkward about it?
I think a part of it's humility. There's a lot of people they almost don't want to hear the feedback, and they'll maybe ask for it, feeling that they should, and then they'll ignore it, or they'll be like, "Oh no, that's stupid." And I'll be honest, I've had that from time to time myself as well. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to take someone's hopefully constructive criticism and take that on board and push forward. When I work with the team at Insomnia, I know that these people have worked with stage hosts who have done far more gigs than me, are probably better than me at what they do. And if they can give me a tip of, "Oh, X and Y did this, by the way," and or
Hmm.
"Have you ever thought about doing this?" It's because they'll have seen someone do it and thought, "Oh yeah, that's good." Or maybe it's something that just makes their life easier. And I'm all about making my broadcast team's life easier. If I can do something that, for my sound guy or for, whoever else on team is going to make things easier for them, or even the camera operators, whoever else, I want to do that because for me, I'm sort of a part of that team. I'm so lucky with Insomnia. It's like a family. I've got to work with the same company, High Vis, multiple times. A lot of the people who come back, I'm not going to name names now because I'll accidentally forget someone and feel really bad about it. But from my sound techs, the lighting people, the camera operators, the people behind the scenes who are setting up all of the overlays, making everything run so smoothly, to our stage managers, everybody, it's like one family, and they are very luckily for me. I feel like I've been embraced into that, and you don't get that in every show that you run, of course. But when you've got the opportunity, of course you can do what you can to make their life easier, and you'll just pick up on little things that can help. And I'm hoping I do an all right job of that because I genuinely care about those people and want to have the best sort of professional relationship with them that I can.
I kind of want to expand on this because that's been kind of my experience for working with GG Tech as well. I found that one of the biggest ways to kill my anxiety about what I'm doing is to be focused on is to get to know the people who are working the show. Exactly, say set yourself up as a position where you're not putting yourself under people, but you're acknowledging that their needs and wants are important. So yeah, going around having the conversations, getting to know people's names, being that I think it feels like you always need to be the one who opens those lines of communications first, because I think, as you said, for a lot of talent, there's going to be some pretty big egos involved, and I think it would be worth more than someone's job to necessarily go up and tell someone, if someone's like a camera operator or similar, it's just not worth their while to make suggestions to a talent who hasn't specifically asked for it, and maybe even then still not, because if the person takes it badly and then goes to complain to your boss, oh yeah, then this person was bothering me while I was doing this stuff, then but I guess to go back to the large point, that if you can build that relationship out and it feels like you're doing the event for the people who are working on it, rather than being, oh, I need to look good, it's like I'm sort of validating all the work that they're putting into the show. It certainly helped me with my anxiety.
I think there's a very dangerous word out there, which unfortunately I've seen too many people take to heart, and it's talent. And the number of times that I have heard either people themselves say it or production teams reference people having called themselves it, and they're like, "I'm the talent." And you hear it, and it does something to your ego. I mean, like I said, I am a bit of a narcissist. I try to tone things back. I try not to be as me, and self-centered as sometimes maybe I have been in my younger years. Whether I've improved that or not, I'm not too sure. You'll go back and you'll listen to this hour-long podcast and hear me talking for 45 minutes and realize that maybe it's still there a bit. But the reality is that I think that if you get on this high horse of, I genuinely think there are people out there, and unfortunately it happens a lot in the esports world, where their personality overcomes so much that they become, I'm bigger than this. I am the star of this show. And I think that you get into very dangerous territory when you do that. If you think that you are any more important to that broadcast running and the way it runs than a camera operator, than a sound tech or whatever else, then you are an idiot, because that show would not be running. You would not be sounding and looking good if it wasn't for those people. And if you're doing a good job out there and you're coming across well, and yeah, yours is the voice and the face that's being heard and seen on the broadcast, great. Kudos to you. Go out and do a good job. But if you think you're the be all and the end on the dog's testicles as you go into it, then frankly, you're going to have issues, and you're always going to have some confrontation. You're probably not going to improve as much because you're not going to have that level of humility to go, you can do this, you can make this thing better. And I think that's all part of it. You're not the number one star on that show. There will be bigger people walk onto that stage than you on a regular basis, and there will be people doing bigger events than you and doing a better job than you. The best that you can do is go out, do your personal best, and look to improve on it where you can.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I really remember back years ago being in a band and being told by somebody who I cannot remember who they were, but saying that be nice to your sound tech, because the sound tech determines how good you will sound.
Damn right.
And that stuck with me.
As a former sound tech myself, yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more direct, I suppose, with a band sort of situation, that if you mess around with the sound desk, you can see this band will sound dramatically different if the sound tech is paying full attention and is kind of tweaking all of the different knobs and things to kind of get your sound to sound the best, or B, half asleep or away from the desk while you're performing because they're just not bothered or invested in you, which could well be because you didn't spend any time talking to them or giving them a reason to care about your performance. And trying to extend that idea to the esports stuff where, yeah, you know, you've got all the admins, you've got all the camera operators and everyone doing, like, cumulatively an astronomical amount of work versus the amount which you would take to go out on stage and talk, and trying to sort of find your place in that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm going to go out and I'm going to give every little bit of my energy for 5 days, and hopefully, you know, go out and earn the paycheck at the end of the day. That's what I'm there to do. But I'm not going to have been there since Wednesday, setting up the stage, getting everything in place like this team's going to. I might help a little bit with the D-rig come Monday, but the reality is they're doing the majority of that work, and they're exceptionally good at what they do. And you know, when I get to work with that team, I'm like I say, I'm lucky. I've got to work the same broadcast so many times and got to get to know people better. Sometimes as a stage host, you'll go from show to show, and maybe you'll recognize a couple of faces, but it won't be the same team over and over again. But often you're working with these fantastic, highly trained professionals, and you know, just give them the respect that they deserve. You know, if you ever look good, it's because they make you look good. You know, I've not seen them for about 6 months, but I'm going to have Adam sort of. I hope he's there again. It'll be I think most of the team's coming back that was there from last time, and he'll be attaching my mics, you know, setting my Britney mic up and all of the like, and getting my earpieces ready, and we'll do that, you know, 10 times a day before and after I go on stage each time. And those little interactions, I value them so much, and I know for a fact that there's no way in heck that, I mean, again, high energy. I peak microphones like nobody else in this business, I think, and you know, and yet somehow when I go back and watch it, I somehow always seem to sound really good and really level and don't, you know, break microphones. And that's because I've got an amazing sound tech and lots of other jobs as well.
No, I think the phrase which I learned, which was very useful, was to ask people about compressors. Because that's the tech that means that when you get too loud, it doesn't cut out, but it reduces the volume as you go beyond a certain decibel level. It starts reducing the volume exponentially, and if you ask for someone to put that in place for you, they really likely will. If if you're nice to them about it, and then you don't end up blowing out people's ears if you get a little too overexcited. But I'm aware we're kind of running out of even an hour here, so there's a couple things I want to touch on, like pretty briefly. I think we'll have to come back at another time and get more detail on them. But so desk hosting, you mentioned it before.
Sure.
Especially desk hosting when you're not necessarily an expert on the game. In brief, what kind of things do you find that you've learned from trying that out for yourself versus when you first started?
The number one thing for me, and most of this comes from the time doing those Valorant analyst desk segments, is learn to sort of almost blend in and disappear in them a little bit. Like, again, you've got to remove that idea of there being this aura of, oh, I'm the star of the show, I need to say loads, I need to get my point across. Do I? Heck, I don't know anything about which gun should have been used or what ability should have been used in that particular scenario. Short, snappy questions, direct to the experts. That's what they're there for. Let them talk, just like you've done today. You know, I'm not calling myself an expert, but you've not spoken for the majority of it. You've posed your questions. You've let me natter on, and they will carry a segment because most of the people are there because they like to talk too, and because they know their game and they're passionate about it and they're good at talking. You'll get an occasional person on there who will give you yes/no answers, but most of the people in this business, they are casters and analysts because they can talk, and you just let them. And often the trick is knowing how to get them to stop talking more than it is to get them to start.
Okay, then I'll ask you the question: if you're an analyst desk host and your analysts are waffling too much, how do you get them to stop in a way which doesn't feel like you're just kind of like, stop?
Yeah, so generally I try and have little cues that I can do. So most of my experience has been sort of sofa opposite sofa and just having these fun casual conversations with each other. Generally speaking, in my experience, I've got a voice in my ear, but they've not got a voice in theirs. So I've got saying to me, right, we're ready to throw to casters, game's ready to start, we need to go now. They don't know that, and they're still mid their point. And so generally, and I've not always remembered this, but usually I'll say, okay, look, I'm going to have this sign. I'll tap my side of the sofa, or if I really need to, I'll give you one of these. the camera will be on them, so that's not picking up on me. Hopefully they're seeing me, they're still engaging with me eye contact wise, and they get it, and they're like, okay, yeah, I better finish that point. And they'll go, right, okay, thank you so much to X and Y. Now we're going over to these guys on the caster desk, and that's it. Like, it needs to be in place beforehand, because they're not going to hear what your voice in your ear is saying unless they're wired up for it as well, which in my experience isn't most of the time. So they need to have had some prep for that. And if you don't prep it before you come on stage, you will literally have one of two options: let them finish their sentence and have an annoyed voice in your ear going, why aren't we going to game? Or two, be that rude guy, go, so I'm really sorry, I have to cut you off there. And then it looks awkward, it looks difficult. So if you can have those little things, that sort of do cut offs, yeah, great.
I think that's a again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think that's a good illustration there of how the host is kind of an extension of production to an extent, in terms of like,
absolutely.
And again, that's not something that's not at all obvious. I do want to touch back on the hand gestures you're putting in there as well, which I think is really interesting, because I think that encapsulates a lot of what makes a difference between a successful and not successful caster and host. Is if you didn't do the whole thing with the hand gestures, nobody's going to do it. And so you have to, it's like, it requires you to take on something of a leadership role to be like, I'm going to have this conversation that other people wouldn't choose to have, and make sure people are ready, and like prep my analysts who are kind of functionally my guests, and make sure they can be the best they can be.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And at the end of the day, I'd rather have that small, relatively simple conversation that takes me a minute and maybe steps on some toes very, very slightly before I go on stage, rather than be an ass and, go, oh, sorry, Peter, no, can't do that now.
All right, well, on to interviewing, because we're completely running out of time. So in like next 2 minutes, can you? I won't ask you to kind of go into any detail here, but just kind of for maybe a future conversation we can have. Can you give me an idea of like how do you approach interviewing, and potentially deal with maybe answers you weren't expecting to get?
So full well that's made me think of one very specific situation that I want to share. Generally speaking, who I'm going to interview massively impacts that. So before, again, preparation, it's my buzzword for the day, but the more you do it and the more you've done before you go onto stage, the easier things get. So if I've spoken to the person who I'm going to speak to at the end of the game, so for instance, if I've got a grand final, I know I need to interview probably a winning player and a losing player, I'll have primed them. I'll go, right, who's your best talker? Who are you happy to do? And I'll have had a quick word with myself. I'll ask you this, and this, depending on whether you've won or lost. And if they've got that base information already, they have a potential to throw me for a bit of a curveball. But generally speaking, I know what I'm going to get. And then it's just a case of thinking on your feet. So if you're doing an event in Nottingham and you ask, you try to just make polite chat and say, oh, what do you think of Nottingham? And they say, it's boring, there's nothing to do here. You don't completely corpse for about 30 seconds and have like the most awkward moment of a broadcast. It also depends what you want. Like, do you want to have fun or do you want it to come across serious? You have to judge a balance sometimes to the event you're doing. So for Insomnia, generally, I'm going to hit a relatively serious level. I'm not going to ask them memey questions unless I know the players well enough that I can have that sort of little jokey banter with them. Generally, I'll keep it serious, and as a result, I'll get a serious response. That's not going to throw me off. It's not until I start to, if you want to be that slightly more fun host and have slightly more crazy things happening around you, then ask them something that you're going to get a reaction from. Just be prepared to deal with it.
I think that's a really good point there, that you're setting the tone for it. And I think in most people's cases, they're not going to probably go too far off base of what you set up, just because people aren't generally confident enough to do it. But all right, we pretty much run out of time here. I don't want to go over the hour, but Stan, from your side of things, is there anything which you'd like the good people to know about if they were watching this video and like, hey, I want to know more about the Stan guy?
Hey, reach out anytime. On at GreyHart99 on Twitter. GreyHart is GreyHart, and there's good reasons for that behind the name, and only I. So hit me up on Twitter. You can find me on Discord and stuff like that as well. If you're in touch with Peter, I hate to say it, but we're good friends. So he'll have all my details and be able to put you in touch with me as well if you really want to chat to me. I love talking about esports. I like talking about hosting. I mean, we've just done it for an hour, and frankly, if anyone has any questions at all, drop me a message. I'm always happy to answer when I have the time.
And from specifically the Insomnia side of things, because Insomnia's definitely been on my bucket list to do as an event, but I've never done it myself. But in terms of will people be able to watch the event on stream?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have streams going out on Twitch. I should know it. I think it's something along the lines of IG Fest. I don't know if I can bring it up quick enough to be able to tell you that for definite. I think it's IG Fest on Twitter. Just got it here.
Oh, IG Fest UK.
IG Fest UK, that's the one. That will have most of our games on. There'll be some others as well that are going off a sister stream. The best way to do is follow their stuff on Twitter, which will give you a shout out of most of the events happening. Also, if you're anywhere near Birmingham or you're not and you fancy a trip out this Easter weekend, we'll be for General Punters Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is the 29th, 30th, 31st of March. Have I got that right? Something along those lines.
Something like
Yeah.
that.
If I don't know when this is going out from Peter, it might be too late by the time you hear this, and you're like, "Oh, go to inside, it's gone." But hey, we do
as soon as possible.
Well, we do 2 Euro as well. So I believe September will be the next one in about 6 months' time, and then another one next Easter. Honestly, they're one of my favorite events in the world. Just really, really fun. Lots of stalls to look around. Lots of esports going on. All sorts of fun things.
All right, Stan. Well, thank you very much for joining, and
good
pleasure. Luck at Insomnia. Hopefully, hopefully I'll be able to get to see you there myself, and some other folks will as well. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.